Just when you thought Trump couldn't do any better, he just expanded his electoral college lead again. Today, we'll be taking a look at the updated 2024 electoral map based on new polling averages. And we're going to fill in the map in poll closing order so you guys can see exactly how the map is actually going to color in red and blue on election night. We'll begin at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, where voting will end in the first 6 states. Together, they make up a total of 60 electoral votes. And we're going to fill in the solid states for both candidates first. Donald Trump is easily going to win Indiana, Kentucky, and South Carolina, while Kamala Harris will carry Vermont, the most liberal state in the country. Moving down to Virginia, we do have a rather competitive race here. Joe Biden won the Commonwealth of Virginia by a double-digit margin in 2020, but the state has been moving to the right in recent years, with Kamala Harris today leading by just 6.4% in the polls. She's only being held up by a new poll showing her up by 11 points, which is a completely unrealistic margin. Virginia is probably going to be decided by less than 5, and it's only going to be lean blue on our map. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Kamala Harris is not going to be able to replicate Joe Biden's success in the state from 2020. Biden became the first Democrat to win the Peach State in nearly 3 decades when he won it in 2020. But today, Donald Trump has taken a 0.9% lead in the polls. He's ahead in every single recent survey with the exception of 2. And coming down to the graph, Kamala Harris only held the lead for a very short period of time, basically a week in early September, but Trump quickly retook the advantage, and it's clear that he is going to win Georgia back, a state he carried by 5 points in 2016. And so on our map today, the state is going to be tilt in favor of the GOP. Next up, at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, voting will end in Ohio, West Virginia, and North Carolina. Of course, West Virginia is going to be solid for the GOP. Republicans are also going to flip the Senate seat there now that Joe Manchin is not running for re-election. He's instead going to be replaced by Republican Jim Justice. In Ohio, though, we do have a relatively more competitive race. Donald Trump leads by 7.4%. Now, in both 2016 and 2020, the polls predicted a Republican victory here by less than 1%. Every single time, though, Trump won Ohio by 8 percentage points or more. There's no doubt he is going to win the Buckeye State again. He's probably going to be able to carry it by a double-digit margin this time. Ohio is going to be likely red on our map. And then down in North Carolina, the Tar Heel state is the only swing state that voted for Trump in both of the last 2 elections. Today, the polling average shows the former president ahead by exactly 1%. He leads in virtually every single recent poll from the state. Kamala Harris never took the lead in North Carolina, even when she peaked in mid-September. Trump has always been ahead, considering just how much he is underestimated in the polls typically. This is a very strong sign that he is indeed going to win North Carolina for a 3rd time. It's going to be lean Republican based on the polls. And then 30 minutes later at 8 p.m., we have the largest poll closing of the night. The states combined here are worth 171 electoral votes, essentially a third of the entire electoral college. We have key races where voting is going to end at this hour in states like Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Florida. But we're going to fill in the solid states first. Donald Trump is easily going to win Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. He is once again going to dominate the Deep South, while Kamala Harris is the heavy favorite in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and she's also on track to win in New Jersey, Delaware, and Illinois by likely margins. Moving up to the Northeast, we have New Hampshire and Maine, 2 races where Harris is probably going to come out on top, but she simply isn't going to win by as comfortable of margins as she's going to win in many of the neighboring northeastern states. And so starting off in New Hampshire, Kamala Harris is on track to defeat Trump here by 7.8% based solely on the polling average. This is actually more than Biden's 7.4% margin of victory from 2020. Obviously, this is not going to happen. Kamala Harris is not going to outperform Joe Biden. The polls here are heavily overestimating her support, but based purely on the numbers, the Granite State is going to be likely blue. While up in Maine, she leads by a ridiculous 11.7%. There's no way Kamala Harris is going to win Maine by double digits when Joe Biden only won the state by 9. But based based on solely the data, it is going to be likely Democratic. While in the 1st District of Maine, Harris is going to win by a solid margin, and in the 2nd District, Trump is going to carry that by a solid margin as well. And then in Pennsylvania, we have the most important race on the map. There is no other state that is going to be more pivotal than the Keystone State. It essentially unlocks the pathway to victory for both candidates. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, the election is over. If Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, she is in a very good position to be able to become the 47th president. But looking at polling today, Donald Trump leads by half a percentage point. The most recent Rasmussen Reports poll has Trump up by 3 points. This is a very good sign considering the polling we've seen in the past. In 2016, Clinton was supposed to win the state by 6.7. She lost the state entirely. In 2020, Biden underperformed the polling by nearly 5 points. Pennsylvania has always been close. Trump's margin is definitely not big, but compared to how he's performed in the past, the former president is in a very strong position. And so Pennsylvania is going to be tilted red on our map, but that's going to be more than enough for him to be able to win the Electoral College. Before I continue, nearly 3/4 of you guys are not subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And join my Discord server to chat with me personally. Link in the description below. And now to fill in Florida, as we all know, this state simply isn't that competitive anymore. It's obviously not going to be a solid state in favor of Trump, but he is on track to win it for a 3rd time. He's probably going to carry it by double-digit margin. The polls have him up by 6.1. This is a very dominant performance by the former president. He leads by 14 points in the most recent New York Times poll, and of course, the New York Times is one of the most leftist pollsters out there. So Florida today is not what it was like 4 years ago. In 2020, people thought Biden was going to win Florida. That was the general consensus. Not only did he lose the Sunshine State, but he performed worse than Hillary Clinton, who only lost Florida by 1.2. Today, the state is going to be lean red on our map, just barely missing out on being likely, but when all the votes are counted, it is probable that Trump is going to win the state by 7 points or more. At 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, voting will end in just the state of Arkansas, which is obviously going to go in Trump's favor. And then fast forward another half hour, at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we have the second largest poll closing of the night. Another third of the Electoral College is up for grabs here from states as far east as New York and as far west as Arizona. We're going to fill in the solid states first. Donald Trump is easily going to win Louisiana, Kansas, all of Nebraska except its 2nd district, as well as North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. We're now going to turn our focus to the Midwest, where we have a lot of contentious races, beginning in Minnesota, where Kamala Harris is only on track to win because she chose Tim Walz to be her running mate, and even then, she isn't performing that well. Joe Biden won Minnesota by 7 points in the last election. Today, Harris leads by just 4.7. Rasmussen Reports, one of the most accurate pollsters out there, they show Harris leading by just 3%. Minnesota really could go down to the wire despite Walz being on the ballot, and so Minnesota is only going to be lean blue on our map. Next up in Wisconsin, this is the major change that I was talking about. Donald Trump has finally flipped Wisconsin's polling average. The two latest polls from Quinnipiac and Rasmussen Reports, they both have Trump leading by 2%, and today, the former president has officially taken the lead. He is ahead by 0.1%. This is the first time Trump has led in Wisconsin since right after Kamala Harris entered the race in early August. So Harris's lead in Wisconsin has finally deteriorated. Donald Trump is the favorite in Wisconsin based on the polls, and at this point, that means that Trump is leading in every single swing state, all 7 battlegrounds. We're going to look at the remaining 3 in just a few minutes here, but with every single key race favored to go to Trump, Kamala Harris has virtually no pathways left to the presidency. In neighboring Michigan, Trump flipped the polls here a few days ago. Today, he leads by 0.9%. He is definitely the favorite here. And the bad news for Harris is that this is the most liberal of all 7 swing states. Joe Biden won Michigan by a larger margin than all of the other battlegrounds. And if you look at just how much polls have tended to overestimate Democrats here, in 2016, Hillary Clinton was on track to win by 11 points. she lost the state entirely. And just like in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris led in the polling average basically since she entered the race, but just a few days ago, Trump retook the lead, and he is in a very dominant position to flip Michigan back, a state he won in 2016 but lost in 2020. It is just barely going to be tilt red on this map. Down in Iowa, Donald Trump is on track to win by 4 points based on the only poll. This poll is obviously wrong. Trump's going to carry the state by at least 8 to 10 points, but based solely on the data, it is going to be lean Republican. While in Nebraska, Harris leads by 10 points on average. The second district is going to be likely blue. And then in New York, the Empire State, which has been a solid blue state in every single election since 1992, Kamala Harris is only on track to win by 13.5. This is a pretty abysmal margin for the vice president. It's going to be likely Democratic on our map. We're now going to move down into the Sun Belt, where we have 4 contentious races, although they do definitely vary in degree. Arizona is going to be the most competitive. This is actually a race the Democrats are defending. Joe Biden carried the state by 0.31% in 2020. He was the first Democrat to win Arizona since Bill Clinton in 1996. But if you looked at polling today, it really doesn't seem like this state was blue in the last election. Donald Trump leads by 1.4% on average, and according to the most recent New York Times poll, he actually leads by a whopping 5 points, much larger than even his 3.5% margin of victory from back in 2016. Looking at how the average has changed over the last few months, there was only a very short 2-day period of time where Kamala Harris actually led in the state. This is when she peaked during the Democratic convention. At every other point, whether it was against Biden or now against Harris, Trump has been ahead in Arizona polling. There's no doubt he's on track to win the state back. Arizona is going to be a flip in favor of the GOP, and it's going to be lean Republican. Next up, in Colorado and New Mexico, these are 2 states Biden won easily by double-digit margins in the last election. Today, though, Kamala Harris is doing notably worse. In Colorado, according to the only poll, she leads by 11 points, which does seem okay, but this is a Democratic-funded poll, so she's obviously going to win by a much lesser margin. And then in New Mexico, she leads by 8 points. Biden carried the state by 11, and this is even a bit of a stretch. It's probably going to go to Harris by 7 percentage points at most. So both Colorado and New Mexico are going to be likely blue based on the polls, but it's very likely that these surveys are overestimating Democratic support. And then finally, in Texas, the Lone Star State is going to be a big prize for the GOP. Donald Trump is, of course, going to win the state. He's going to win it, in fact, for a 3rd time in a row. He leads by 5.8%. There's no doubt he is going to win. He leads in virtually every single poll. We do have a rather competitive Senate race in Texas, though, where Ted Cruz is fighting hard to hold onto his seat. He is still probably going to win. Trump's going to win by a much larger margin. Texas is going to be lean blue based on the polls, but ultimately, it's going to go to Trump by a likely margin at the minimum. Next up, at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, voting is going to end in Montana, Utah, and Nevada. Montana and Utah are obviously going to be solid blue, while in Nevada, Donald Trump leads by 0.5%. This is definitely a competitive race. No Republican has won the Silver State since 2004. It really could go either way, but compared to both 2016 and 2020, there's no doubt that Trump is polling better than ever before. He really does have a good chance at winning Nevada for the first time as a Republican in nearly 2 decades. It's a state the GOP has struggled in over the last 20 years. Obama won it by 12 points in 2008, but the margin has been shrinking ever since. Nevada's been shifting to the right, with the state electing a Republican governor back in 2022. And today, based on the polls, Trump is on track to edge out a very narrow victory. It's going to be tilt red based on the numbers. Fast forward another hour at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, voting is going to end out on the West Coast. Kamala Harris is easily going to win Washington and California, while Oregon's going to be likely, and then Idaho, of course, is going to be solid for Donald Trump. Then 1 hour later at midnight on the East Coast, voting will end in Hawaii, which is obviously going to vote in favor of Kamala Harris overwhelmingly. And then at 1 a.m. Eastern Time in Alaska, this is the final state that's going to be called, Donald Trump is going to win Alaska. And so based on the new polling averages, Donald Trump leads with 312 electoral votes, his largest margin since Kamala Harris first entered the race. With less than 20 days to go until the election, Trump is essentially in the best position he has ever been in. There's no doubt he is on track to win this election. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November.